Changemakers. Thank you for tuning into the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. I'm your fervent feminist host, Raven O'Neill, and I get the honors of sitting down weekly with diverse experts from all walks of life to explore ideas, opportunities, and strategies that we can all use to hack our way to better lives within patriarchal societies. If you're ready to hack patriarchal systems and structures, I invite you to join us and help move the needle. Hi, listeners. Today I'm sitting down with Emily Luck. Emily is a fintech entrepreneur building Plenty, a wealth platform designed to democratize financial planning for couples. With a background in scaling startups like Stripe and Even, she has deep expertise in finance, strategy, and business operations. A CPA and CFA charter holder with roots in venture capital, Emily comes from a family of entrepreneurs and has been passionate about creating innovative solutions since childhood. When not revolutionizing financial technologies, she can be found baking, making to-do lists, or enjoying football. Let's come together and offer Emily a very warm welcome. Hi, Emily. Welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Yes, we are going to talk about everyone's favorite taboo topic, money. We're going to talk about it from a standpoint of couples, and also just how women manage their money, invest their money, etc. I think a great starting place is with your background. If you don't mind telling me about your background, your company Plenty, working with your husband, and how that leads into the conversation.
Absolutely. So I'm Emily. Originally, my career started off as a CPA and CFA. So I pursued both of those designations largely because I graduated out of a business program. And I realized that even though I'd taken all these classes that taught me so much about the world of business, I actually hadn't learned anything about how to manage my own money. My parents were immigrants, and so I saw firsthand how many questions you have, especially when you feel like I don't know who to trust, I don't know who to ask. And I realized that especially if you don't have that background, that's just the natural case for a lot of people. And I didn't want to have that path for myself. So I ended up doing those two destinations. And then career-wise, I worked first as a VC, investing in software companies. And then I've spent about the last 10 years working in fintech companies like Stripe, as well as a company that was now acquired by One and Walmart. For us, very much the couples theme. My life story with my husband and my life partner was we actually met working together at a company that was really focused on helping people living paycheck to paycheck reach a point of stability. When we worked at that company, that was the company that was eventually acquired by One and Walmart. And we really started talking about how it felt like for so many people entering their 30s and 40s, they were starting to reach a point where they had bigger questions about, can we afford a house? Can we afford more kids? What does life gonna look like? And yet navigating those questions was still really difficult. When we ended up making the decision to go take some time off to travel after the acquisition, we ended up getting engaged. And that was where the light bulb really went off for Plenty. Because we looked at the last generation of companies that were building for individuals and consumers, and what we kept seeing was they were really focused on helping individuals. And as we thought about this generation entering their 30s and 40s, what we realized is most people are actively managing money with a partner. So if your tools don't let you easily understand with your partner, how much do we have? How much do I have? How much do we spend? How much am I spending? These really important questions about your money, it means that you're just not equipped to be able to make the best decisions that will ultimately impact your future. So it's been a journey 3 years in the making. We've, raised about $8 million of venture capital, and we've had a lot of fun working with so many different couples and supporting their journeys as they build their lives together.
Oh my goodness. I have so many questions. This is going to be such a good topic. Because the name of the podcast is Hacking the Patriarchy, we talk about men versus women dynamics in every episode. And I imagine, and again, I continue to make terrible assumptions on this show, but that men and women are taught how to manage money differently, go through life managing money differently, and what that might look like beforehand, how you might advise beforehand with the expectation of coupling up, and then once you couple up, how to move forward.
Couldn't agree more. I think that for us, It was actually one of the big reasons why we even wanted to build Plenty in the first place. I think both Channing and I, my husband, we were raised by very strong moms who did think it was really important to stay independent and stay involved with things like money. One of the things that we noticed, if your tool doesn't even make it possible, or if your product, or if you look at, any of the big financial institutions like the Fidelities and Vanguards of the world, they have these broken experiences where they either make it only possible for one person to see everything, and that just bakes in an inherent dependency, or they assume that every single thing is fully joint, which happens now for about 20% of couples that we see. So it's also just not the norm nowadays. What we have seen also is that very much it goes almost back to childhood. When your kids, guys and boys, are really supported in math and numbers and their development there. And when that's really supported and encouraged, it means that it also doesn't feel as uncomfortable and it doesn't feel as awkward. And for a lot of ladies, especially when they were young girls in the schooling system, and this goes back decades, they were encouraged to pursue things that were more like arts and histories and less of like the maths and sciences. This is a problem that we've seen for decades at this point, and is a lot of the reason why, if you go back and see people graduating from science programs, math programs, tech programs, there was a very big gender split. But when it comes to money, what that means is there's this conditioning where sometimes if people, for ladies who look at numbers, it's very natural for them to potentially feel like, I don't know where to start, this is so overwhelming. Maybe it's easier to just not look at it. And for guys, there's just not quite as much of that because of that social conditioning from a young age. Now, if you start to play that forward, what we tend to see is that, especially in older generations, where there was even more of a lopsided dynamic, where one person was the person who worked, and that was usually the male, then that made, the income dynamic also altered there, because whoever is earning usually then also dictates and determines a lot of the financial decisions, and happens to potentially be the person who is more comfortable with that, and the female ends up being less involved and engaged. This paradigm is really starting to change, because increasingly both people in a partnership are now working. So now in 80% of today's adults who are in relationships, they both work. And so that income inequality isn't quite as great anymore, but definitely one of the final frontiers is really supporting ladies in staying involved with their money and not just saying, I'm uncomfortable, I don't know where to start, maybe I'm just going to leave it all to you, because to us it's as critical as a life skill.
Oh my goodness. So I once had a boss way back in the day that had told me his marriage was perfect because the one thing they did is they never mixed finances. Mm-hmm. She had her accounts, he had his accounts. They would bring those together to pay bills, but they kept it separate. Do you see a lot of that? And do you recommend that?
Yeah, so we definitely see a lot of that. Typically, we see couples manage money in 3 different ways. One, which is they keep everything separate. They may pay for things together, but they don't really have joint accounts yet. They don't really have, any kind of like joint credit cards or even loans. They think of it as more like, I'll pay you back for maybe the car, or we each manage our own car loans and our own student loans. That type of way for managing money is usually a little bit more common for people who are remarried, potentially have other things that they are financially responsible for, like kids or older parents, or their own businesses, or people who are higher net worth. That's just a generalization for what we've seen. The category where there are the most number of couples who fit this are the group of couples who end up having a mix of, we have some things that are separate. Oftentimes, those are things that we already had before we entered our partnership or our marriage. So it might have been, I've worked for 15 years. I've saved up my own investment account. That I consider fully mine. But once we're married, now we're starting to consider more of that as ours together and joint. That's usually more common for couples where we see this as more of like middle income, where it is important and necessary, where if they want to buy a house, they really do need to work together to afford that down payment. And so we typically see this structure also work really well and have a lot of flexibility, because some couples say, 90% of things now are joint. And other couples might say 10% of things are joint, but it preserves the togetherness and the independence. Then the third bucket are couples who have everything fully joint. That is usually much more common for couples who are in older generations or couples who get married at a much younger age. What we also tend to see though is that it might take some time to get there, but it's also not uncommon for a couple nowadays to get married, and maybe it's not until even 5 years into the marriage, 10 years into the marriage, maybe a couple kids into the marriage, where eventually they get to a point where they're like, we now see things as pretty much ours together, but it takes years, whereas before it used to happen just immediately at the time when you got married.
Gotcha. I want to dive into what you do at your company, Plenty, but the question I'm going to ask might kind of lead into that. So you gave us 3 different ways this money can be managed, and I'm sure there's idiosyncrasies in there to each one. But based on your background, which one is the most ideal? And if there is an ideal, how do you get there?
Yeah, so we think that for our platform, we actually support all 3 ways of managing money. So our dashboard gives you a really easy way where you can flip between what's ours versus what's mine. And it also gives you flexibility where maybe you've decided that, hey, we each have our own savings account or we each have our own credit card and you want to make that private. Part of this is we do support any way it is flexible for however you want to manage money with your partner. But what we tend to say is, especially for couples who are just starting to manage money together, it's a good practice and a healthy practice to start with actually having some things that are continue to be separate, as well as also then starting to have your first couple things that are joint. The reason why having a few things that are joint is so important is because you do share responsibility for paying certain bills. You're maybe paying for sharing a car, you're maybe sharing a home, and just life-wise, it will make the logistics way easier if you account for the spending that you do together. What we've seen for couples is often a bonding experience, is then also when you start to say, hey, we have dreams. There are things we want to do. Maybe we want to renovate the house. Maybe we want to go travel. Maybe we want to have a kid. But having a place where you're actually saving for that together, researchers have found that actually when you have separate accounts that maybe you're like, my savings account is for these 3 things I'm trying to pay for. And your partner also has a separate savings account that maybe is 2 of the goals that you're saving for together and a few of their own goals. Having it separate, you will actually put less money aside and save less money than if you put into a joint account and then clearly said, this bucket of money is for our home renovation goal. This bucket of money is for our travel goal. So not only do we find it actually really powerful in bringing couples together, financially, you're also better off because you end up saving more.
That is so fascinating. I didn't even think about that, but that does make sense. So, okay, let's change topics a little tiny bit. In your profession, I imagine you see all different kinds of couples where the woman might be more outspoken than the man, or one where a woman doesn't speak at all. And since this is Hacking the Patriarchy and we're trying to get women to get more involved with their money, how would you recommend they take that lead, but also how can men better advocate for that in their relationships?
Yeah, and I would say, I really go back to wherever you are in your journey with your money, it's have patience and understanding with yourself. And that actually, I think, unlocks the ability to kind of grow and evolve. And so if it is something that you're not really comfortable with, thinking about investments yet or your money, that's okay. I think the most important starting point is I will promise you over a 6-month period, if you have a practice of just looking at how much money do I have? Where is my money going? Where's our money going? How much are we spending? How much are we saving and investing? All of which we make very easy within our product. But if you do these things and just do it every month for 6 months, I will promise you, and we've seen with couples, you just get more comfortable because every time it'll get a little bit easier. What we also tend to see is for couples who are starting off, is not uncommon for if you haven't really engaged with it before, to feel like maybe you're just, a passenger in the seat and your partner, the best way you can support your partner and bring them along is to just walk them through super slowly and patiently. And what we tend to see with a lot of couples is over time, the person who has less confident about the finances, starts to ask more questions. Why did we spend that much there? How do we save more? Is this the right goal? Oh, are we investing here or are we saving here? But it really starts off with just saying, how do I just understand what's happening? You don't need to go from that point of I'm not sure where to start all the way to I'm an expert in investments overnight. It can be a journey that takes years, but the first step is really just understanding what you have and where things are going. And I think for a lot of partners to support that, really be understanding where, hey, emotionally, it can be intimidating. So if you also feel like you're not equipped to answer a question about what does this mean, then really lovingly support them in looking that up for themselves. And it's not about making them feel bad that they don't know it, potentially because you don't even know how to explain it well too. So, you get a bit of that feeling, but I think those are some of the cores that are really important in starting that journey towards gaining this life skill.
Awesome. Okay, full transparency. I have not been on your platform, but I want our listeners to go check it out. Walk me through an initial experience, what the greatest part of your offerings are, and what anyone listening that goes on to check it out should really be looking at.
Yeah, so we are a free product for couples to come in. You connect your accounts. You can choose which accounts you want to share. And then you get this view to say, what do we have and what do I have? So you can flip between the two. So maybe you have that private credit card, you'll see that in the what's mine view. Maybe you have a set of joint accounts, or maybe you have an account where it's under one person's name, but you view it as yours together. But that ultimately helps you understand and answer the question of what do we have and where are we? Then the second part of the product gives you the ability to understand where all of your money is going. So for every single account that you connect, we pull in all of the transactions, whether that's your savings account, your checking account, your credit cards, your debit cards. And what we'll start to build a picture for is to say, you spent this much money on here. You maybe, had this much money go into your saving investment account. Great job. You saved 10% of your income last month. So we'll help you automatically create that picture. As you start to use the product, we'll also start to fine tune categorizations where we'll give you a better and better picture as you start to say, when I go to Amazon, it's for this. When I go to Costco, it's for this. But we give you that one picture and really then answer the second question, which is, where is my money going? Across earning, spending, saving, and investing. Then the third part of our product is a product for saving and investing. So for a lot of couples, what we started seeing was they would open up additional savings accounts or checking accounts to say, this little thing is for our down payment, this is for our trip. And we started noticing that behavior. What we wanted to do was to make it even more powerful, because for so many of the goals that couples have, they're potentially years in the future. So we took the same concept of being able to say, I have one goal for this, I have another goal for this. And so we made it possible where you can use this goals functionality, but it's boosted. So you actually have the ability to earn either the 4.14% for our cash goals or actually invest it for goals that are a few years out. And you can also organize it completely with your partner. And then the best part there is that you also can say, I'm going to deposit $200. My partner's going to deposit, maybe $100 because I earn more. Then you can just set that up to happen every single month. And then you just don't need to think about it again. It's completely set it and forget it. For that part of the product, we do charge a fee. It is $2 for every $1,000 we manage per year. So very much as affordable as a product can get.
Okay, I'm going to ask a possibly stupid tech question that you might have covered in there that I just didn't wrap my head around. Question. So you're pulling in these accounts. Can you manage the accounts that are separate in the app, or does it manage in their normal app and it only pulls the information in?
Great question. So for any accounts that are connected, if you already have an investment account, that we do not manage because you all have to manage that. For example, if you have an account at Schwab already, you have to manage it through Schwab. When you connect a bank account though, if you want to use that bank account and move money from that bank account into a Plenty investment account for Plenty goals, that's where we can actually move the money in, and you could tell us, I want to move $500 per month for this goal, $200 for this goal, $100 for this goal. all of that automatically. So in that way, we do manage money when it comes to our investment accounts.
Gotcha. See, maybe it wasn't that stupid and it was very clarifying. Thank you.
Great question.
I want to dive into, again, men versus women. No matter, I'm not a man, so I don't know the answer to this, but I imagine that money is one of the most stressful topics. And when we're talking about couples, again, you have your own thing, you come in, who knows what the other person has, you're pulling it together. Just kind of managing that stress. What do you recommend maybe the initial conversation looks like? But also, I've heard other people advise, have a money date once a week, look at your finances together.
Yeah.
Shoot, even have a money date by yourself and look at your finances alone. But kind of what maybe that initial jumping point is, and then also a good cadence for your money management.
Yeah, so for that first conversation, what I find is really helpful is that to actually have that conversation, not even start with, what do you have? What do I have? What debt do you have? What debt do I have? To actually start off with the conversations of what your childhood looked like. Because just like actually even beyond the world of money, if you saw your mom do a certain thing all the time, you will naturally, if you're female, be more likely to recreate that behavior. So sharing what it was like growing up is I think the most fundamental place to start, because that makes it possible to build the empathy to understand where your partner is coming from. So questions like, how did your family talk about money? Or maybe how did your family not talk about money? How did they value money? How did they think about saving versus investing versus couponing? Were you brought in as a child into those conversations? Were you involved in it? Was it celebrated when you saved money, or was it celebrated when you spent money? And I think those sets of questions around values are actually the most important place to start, because then I think the question is, when you're talking about where are you right now, then the healthy thing to, I think, approach it is maybe one person does have more debt. Maybe one person has more in saving and investing, because you have two people. That will almost always happen, that one person has more or less of one of the two things. But I think the really important thing to remember is you're each responsible for your money as individuals, but you can still work together on how you're going to move forward. And so I think one of the places where I see a lot of couples potentially get stuck is when it gets into, oh my gosh, how do you have so much debt? Then it starts to become more of these judgment conversations. Instead of saying, we're here, we can't change the past, maybe there are some behavioral things that need to happen, but what are you as an individual going to try to do differently moving forward? And what are we together as a team going to try to do moving forward? So anchoring really any conversations about where you are with really a forward-looking view, because you have control over that. You have the agency over that. It's really hard when you just focus on the where are we conversation, because that's, I think, when you get in the rut potentially of like, oh, it feels like a stalemate. In terms of money dates, what I typically recommend is a money date every month or two. I am very much in the camp of work hard, play hard, and so you need to make it fun, because money dates can often feel like work. And so what I often recommend for couples is to pick something they really love doing. Maybe it's going to a movie theater and getting popcorn. Maybe it's going out dancing. Maybe it's going to have a picnic. But make sure that when they plan the money date, they plan a reward for themselves at the end, so it doesn't just feel like all work. And then the money date conversation, I keep fairly structured to say, what happened the last month? Where are we? Where did our money go over the past month? Then into, is there anything we want to do differently for the next month when it comes to spending or when it comes to saving and investing? Then the third set of things I talk about is, as we think about the months coming up, is there anything that we want to make sure we've talked about? So now, given that it's January, maybe one of those topics might be, actually we want to do a vacation in the summer, so maybe we want to save up a little bit more. Or maybe it's, hey, we have taxes coming up, so maybe let's actually plan a special money date that's just about taxes, so we just get it done and we don't have to worry about it.
Okay, that whole section was the most sage money advice I'd ever heard. Thank you for that. The fact you should talk about the psychology behind it, I'm not sure psychology was the right word, but like how you were raised, what's in your subconscious about money? What's there? Should they do that on the first date?
I mean, no two couples are the same. And so I think the way I think about this is money is definitely an uncomfortable conversation. And also, I think it's healthy to have uncomfortable conversations, but every couple and every individual will know what is their limit. And at some points, it's good and healthy to get really close to, it's a little bit uncomfortable, but it's good for the relationship overall. But I think as a first date conversation, if it feels right, then it feels right. And for some people, maybe it doesn't right away. And that's also okay. It definitely doesn't need to be a first date combo.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about the single woman, because I don't want, or actually the single people. Let's not leave them out of the conversation. Let's talk about best money practices when it comes to just managing your money as a single person, but managing your money as a single person that is maybe going to couple up. And then also kind of what that looks like. I'm sure that single people could use the platform. What does that look like when you do couple up?
Yeah. So for our platform, you can absolutely start solo. We have that as a feature in our settings where you start on your own. And at any point down the road, you can invite a partner whenever that feels right. I think for a lot of single individuals, I would say now is the best time to really develop these skills that will carry you whenever you're in partnership. Because ultimately, if you feel like you have good practices for understanding your money, you have good practices for managing it well in terms of saving and investing, that will be a really good boost for you, either potentially helping shape those decisions in your relationship, potentially lead those conversations in your own relationship. And at a minimum, I do think of this as such an important life skill. It's almost like can you take care of yourself? Can you feed yourself? Can you clothe yourself? Can you manage your own money? And so I would say whether you're in partnership or whether you're on your own, this is just something that will really pay off for the rest of your life if you invest in it earlier on.
Awesome. I want to dive in a little bit because you tend to think of money. You think of income, expenses, saving, investing, but you might not think of these other little buckets that kind of sit in there. So what would you say are the top things, no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, you should be looking at, again, once to twice a month?
Yeah, so I actually think of those areas, one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen, especially females make, is that investing feels very risky. And if you look at the data for the stock market over the course of the last set of decades, if you invest money for, a 5-year time period, you have a 90% plus probability of having made money, as long as you just put it in the market for 5 years. Now, I share that statistic because the number one mistake that I see ladies make is they do an incredible job of saving and then they don't invest. And that savings is sitting in a checking account or sitting in even a savings account, but that savings account is earning 0.6%, 4%, whereas last year, if you look at the stock market, it went up 25%. Now, not all years are going to do that great, but if you, I think, were like, oh, I'm earning more, very well-intentioned ladies who feel on top of their money have put their money in a high-yield savings account, earned that 4%, pay taxes on that 4%, versus other people who are willing to take the risk end up keeping that, in an investment account that could have earned 25% and is not taxed right away. So I think actually one of the most important things to review is how much cash do you actually need in a checking or savings account versus how much you should be proactively moving into an investment account every month. And one of the things that I hear a lot of times from couples and individuals are, but it's my emergency fund. And one of the things that we tend to see is, okay, well, how much do you actually need for your emergency fund? And at what point does it start to not make as much financial sense, at least, to have that much cash sitting there? And what we tend to say is the second thing that's really important is to make sure that for that emergency fund, what I typically recommend is, let's say you spend, $2,000 $2,000 every month on your expenses, just to throw in a number. What I typically recommend is you keep in your checking account about, 50% more. So maybe you keep $3,000 instead of the $2,000. In your checking account, you'll make sure you never overdraw your account. That's typically what I find is like just keeping life simple. Then if you have, that $2,000 that you're spending every month, what I would recommend in a savings account that sits there and an emergency fund that sits in a savings account is somewhere between 3 to 6 months. Anything more than that, I do strongly then recommend that unless you're buying a house or you're buying a car or you need the money within the next year, put the rest of it into an investment account because you can always withdraw the money. If it goes down, you can pull the money out. Maybe it went down 10%, you can still pull the money out. It doesn't mean your money is locked away. But that is, I think, the number one mistake people make. And I would just double check how much money is in the emergency fund and how much money are you actually keeping in cash versus you should be moving into investing.
So good. So good. And I love the part about taxes because you never get away from taxes. In that process, actually, I have a great question for you, and I don't even know if it's something you specialize in, but a lot of times I feel people pay maybe a little bit more because they don't want to owe. And what is the best practice in regards to the tax planning when you're managing your money?
Yeah, so actually one of the things that was such a surprise for me is if you look at some of the headlines where they talk about, these billionaires who pay tax rates and they're less than what someone who earns $60,000 would pay. I think one of the really important things to know and understand about taxes when you're managing your money is that you actually do have things that everyday individuals can do to reduce your taxes, but you need to look for it. And looking for it doesn't mean that you need to be an expert. So actually one of the things that we actually built directly into the product because we thought it was so important and we thought more people should have access without needing to spend a lot of time and energy managing it is the ability to reduce taxes on potential capital gains that you have for your investments. Capital gains are if you invest in something, let's say you buy for $10, it goes up to $15 and you sell it, you then potentially have to pay taxes on that $5 that it went up. And what a lot of people don't realize is that there are strategies where you can actually reduce that through something called tax loss harvesting. It used to be something that wealthy people would actually pay portfolio managers. They would hire a whole army to just manage their multi-million, billion-dollar portfolios to do it for them. But nowadays, like what we've done here with Plenty, is we've turned it all into software. So it's actually just built directly into the portfolios. And it can have a pretty big impact on reducing the potential capital gains taxes that you'd have to pay. When we've done the math and just seen, what happens if you're earning different amounts of income, what kind of impact that you'd have. Let's say you have a stock portfolio that earned 10% in a year. You could potentially increase the returns through tax loss harvesting by up to 2 to 4% in after-tax gains with strategies that use tax loss harvesting. So I think that's actually one of the most important things to take note of, which is that nowadays there are ways to reduce your taxes. Not just like, oh, I have no choice. I have to pay it. You actually have ways that are very legal and have been around for decades that wealthy folks have used that are now available for everyday families.
So many great things in here. I love to wrap up the show with 3 hacks. So your top 3 money management hacks outside of hopping on your platform, because we want everyone listening to hop on Plenty and check it out. What are your top 3 hacks?
My first hack is definitely making the money dates fun. My husband and I, we definitely try to make it, whether it's opening up a bottle of wine, making sure we have something to look forward to afterwards. It is some amount of work. Very few people in this world are like, great, money date. That's like the most exciting thing we could be doing on a Saturday or Sunday. I'm not going to tell you that it is. There's definitely other things I'd rather be doing, but it's part of adulting and it's part of being responsible. But I can make it fun, or I can at least give myself something to look forward to on the other side of it. That's the number one. I would say my second biggest hack is, like what I mentioned earlier, about paying attention to areas where you can actually save on taxes. Because I do think that that's an area that for so many everyday folks, it's easy to just assume that there's nothing you can do. And for people who are wealthy, that is absolutely not the case. They know that there's a tax act, and that tax act is like a wizardry that they can then see what do you combine in order to actually change the amount of taxes they pay. The third thing that I find as a hack is, and this goes actually a lot to the psychology of it, when you have things that you're saving for, if you don't have it clearly organized or labeled, it's just really easy to lose track of it or to get confused. And the moment when you add another person in, that little bit of confusion ends up being 3, 4, 5 times more complicated, where you just both end up not really knowing where you stand. I think life is complicated enough. And so if you can make that really simple for yourself by just spending that time up front to set things up in a really organized way, it will make your life so much easier every single time you look at your money from that point onwards.
Awesome. Gosh, this was such a good episode. Is there anything I haven't covered that you absolutely want to drill home to our listeners?
I mean, thank you so much for having me. It was such a joy. For all the ladies listening, I would definitely say, I'm so excited for this journey. You absolutely have everything you need to be great at managing your money. But the first step, just start with looking at your money and looking at where it goes. And so excited, I think, for so many people, we've seen really what those journeys can look like over time, where you really go from a place where you didn't know where to start to you feel really good and confident and positive and optimistic. And I'm so excited for more people to have that journey.
Awesome. For anyone tuning in, where can they find you? How can they reach out?
Yeah, so our website is withplenty.com. We are Plenty Financial on social media, so would absolutely love to welcome more people to the product as well as to our social channels, because we are very directly engaged there with all the people who are loving our product.
I love it. I will put all of that in the show notes. Emily, thank you for joining me today and offering so many amazing insights for the people tuning in. I was going to say women, but the people tuning in.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to today's episode. For all the juicy deets on this episode, be sure to check out our show notes or give us a holler on Instagram at Hacking the Patriarchy Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support this podcast, don't be shy. Please share it with your friends. Sharing is caring after all. Lastly, if you'd like to lend your personal support, please take a moment to tell the world about it with a review on your favorite streaming platform. We'd be forever grateful. Tune in again soon to enjoy a brand new episode of the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. And until next time, keep on hacking, my friends.